Another story we read this semester that discusses parental maternal relationships with children was A Bronsonville Mother Loiters in Mississippi. Meanwhile, a Mississippi Mother Burns Bacon by Gwendolyn Brooks. This poem we read in the week about lynching, and it talks about the white perspective on lynching, and specifically the white female perspective, because this is about the woman who potentially caused the lynching, if that makes sense. She questions in the actual text of, did he even do anything to me? So that made me feel like she was probably the one who had issued the allegations against him that resulted in his lynching. And this one to me highlighted the mother's inability to protect her children during the time that this story was written. Honestly, for most of history, women and their children have been at the mercy of their husbands and fathers. It was only within the 1900s that said that in cases of divorce, children could go with their mothers and not just automatically go with their fathers. So for a very long time, women didn't have resources or the abilities to protect themselves or their children from their husbands, even when they were abusive. It was only within the 1900s also that you could sue your husband or spouse for raping you, because for most of human history, women and children were seen as almost the property of men. Not quite property in the way that slaves were seen all the time. Well, for a while, women and children were both had no rights against their husband. They couldn't do anything if anything happened as a result of their husband. But to me, this one highlighted it in two different ways because of the relationship between the mother narrating the story and the mother whose son was lynched. In terms of the mother whose son was lynched, we don't hear about her. We don't hear from her perspective. But she was unable to protect her child from a lynch mob of white men, which must have been horrific, honestly. And I'm glad that we didn't read that perspective, because that would have just been absolutely heartbreaking. But the mother narrating also feels like she didn't protect the boy who was lynched, and she does wonder in the story if he did anything to warrant the lynching itself. But the main example of a mother's relationship with her children in this story, in my opinion, is about the mother's inability to help her own children. So in the story, they're sitting down for a meal, and she's talking about how she gets the babies in their seat, and she goes and checks herself in the mirror before she calls him in. And every time she references her husband, he's either him or he or something like that, and it's always in all caps, which made it really interesting to me because it almost felt like she was afraid of him just based off of what she called him. Like, it's him. So that's just reiterating that sense to me as well. But she specifically talks about how the younger son wants more molasses with his meal. And it says that the younger son picks up the molasses pitcher and throws the contents into his brother's face. And it's also talking about how the child's smiling, like he's thinking he's funny. They say he's grinning like a criminal or something along those lines. Like he thinks he was being funny or cute or whatever children think when they do something that we adults clearly see as bad, but they see as more gray. And the father proceeds to get up from his seat and slaps the child clean across the face. And the mother just sits there. She can't fight back against him. She can't say anything. So the poem says, and quote, she left the table to the tune of her child's lamentations, which were shriller than ever. She looked out the window. She said not a word. And then it goes on that the fear tying her as if with iron. So she is afraid of her husband. She's afraid of him for her sake and for her children's sake, and she can't do anything. Her hands are tied as if with iron because of the fear and the social roles and how the law protects men rather than women and children at this time. And she even goes on to state flat out that she, again another quote, their mother, could not protect them. And to me, that's got to be one of the hardest things in the world, is to not be able to protect your own child from your spouse and their father. So, and this unfortunately was very common for many women of this time, where the laws didn't protect them. It didn't protect them to say anything, to get away from their husbands, because oftentimes if the women in these situations just left and took the kids, they would be in trouble for kidnapping, and the children would be returned to the abusive father, and she would lose all rights to them. And unfortunately, that's how it was for a very, very, very long time. And then at the end of the scene, he comes up behind her at the window and he talks about, they make a comment about something happening that night. And then he kisses her, and she talks about how she hates it, but she has to. Because especially women's role during this time was defined by their husbands. So this story talks about the mother's inability to protect them, to protect the children. And I think it also discusses her inability to protect the boy who was lynched, because she doesn't like that it happened. And to me, she played a role in it, because it, from my reading of the text, makes it sound like she was the one who put the allegations against him. So this story talks about how the sad truth of, for many, many years, about how mothers weren't always able to protect their children from their own husbands and their children's fathers. And the pain that she goes through, and how she can't even look. And she talks about how she knows the baby's cheek is red, and she knows there's probably some blood, and she can hear the sobs, but she can't do anything because she can't go against him. And then another story that we read that analyzed that discussed the relationship between mother and children, it was the poem Wishes for Sons by Lucille Clifton. And I really liked this poem, and I liked discussing this poem in class because many of us read the poem differently, and the text supports all the different readings of this poem. For example, I had taken the stance in the discussion that the narrator wants her sons to understand. She wants them to know what it's like. She wants them to know the pain. She wants them to know how out of control it is. And she wants them to understand. She actually there was a line that really stuck out to me in this poem, and it was, I wish them 1 week early and wearing a white skirt. And then she goes on to say, let the flashes come when they meet someone special. Let the clots come when they want to. And it's all about how women don't have a choice, and guys don't always realize that. Like, women and girls are at the mercy of our bodies most of the time, honestly. Between PMS, menopause, periods, all of it, getting pregnant. Like, we're often at the mercy of our body and our biological makeup, and guys don't get that because there's nothing really that guys go through that is similar to this. It is something that is unique to women, which is why when I read the story, I had read it as she wants them to understand. She wants them to know what it's like, because then maybe they'd understand and be better for knowing. But then other people had read, and I also agreed and liked this analysis of it, is that she wants her sons to see women as strong. She doesn't want them to go through the pain because the pain is awful. She wants them to just acknowledge that women are strong because of what they go through, because they have no say in what their bodies are going through. So there's that two different meanings of this poem, is that either she wants her sons to understand and to actually go through it so that way they fully understand, and she wants them to know what it's like. Or, and I don't think the two are mutually exclusive, or she wants them to know women are strong. And again, I don't feel like these two ideas, analysis of this poem, are mutually exclusive, because wanting her sons to go through this pain, wanting her sons to experience what girls go through, would also show them that women aren't weak, they are strong. It's like a different kind of strength, though. It's more of an inner strength. So I thought that the two-part analysis of this was very interesting in how some people see it as either or, but I kind of see it as both. Like, the mother wants them to know that women are strong, and she wants them to understand the pain that they go through, and those ideas aren't mutually exclusive. But I really liked reading about the theme in this semester of mothers and their children, and how mothers influence their children, like in everyday use, where when they're growing up, she lets Dee run wild and do as she pleases and do what she wants and be free to do things. It then makes Dee feel like she deserves whatever she wants, whenever she wants, however she wants. But with Maggie, she limits her by not believing she can achieve everything that Dee can. And in doing so, Maggie doesn't always feel like she deserves everything. So when Dee is insisting on taking the quilts, Maggie just goes, she can have them. She doesn't want to fight with her. Dee can have them. And she says that she remembers Grandma in her mind. She doesn't need physical things. But I think it's more than that. I think it's Dee does think, because of how they were raised, Dee believes she deserves everything. And Maggie doesn't think she does. She thinks that Dee is better, and she thinks Dee is more successful, and that Dee deserves what Dee wants. Because that's sort of the lesson that the mother instilled in them by only sending Dee to school. Dee has the prettiest clothes, and the resentment that grew between the two of them. And then in A Bronsonville Mother Loiters in Mississippi, meanwhile, a Mississippi mother burns bacon. That story to me was all about women's inability to protect their children, as well as the story about the lynching. But it discussed how women were at the mercy of men in their lives, and how women could only do so much for their children, even though they wanted to do so much more, but they couldn't. And then again in Wishing for Sons, to me that story really talks about like the difference between a mother-son relationship versus a mother-daughter relationship, because a mother-daughter relationship, they know what they each go through, or they understand, or they can help each other go through those things. But mothers and sons, they lose that intimacy almost when sons start to grow up, because they don't understand, they don't know, and there's only so many things moms can really help with when their sons get to be a certain age, because then they look more towards their dads for advice rather than towards their moms. But I just thought that the readings this semester that depicted mother-children relationships